Hey guys, today I'm reading Yankee Doodle Gals, Women Pilots of World War II by Amy Nathan, foreword by NASA astronaut Aryan Karki. Foreword. I first learned about the wasps when I was in college in the early 1970s. I'd been interested in flying for several years and had read numerous books on aviation. Most of the books were about male pilots, as it was still unusual for women to fly. There were only a few women airline pilots then. There were no female pilots at all in the U.S. Air Force. I figured that's how it had always been until I found a book about Yankee Cochran and discovered that for 2 years during World War II, more than 1,000 women flew military aircraft, fighters, bombers, trainers, and transports. They were the wasps. Pilots Jackie Cochran and Nancy Love were their leaders. It was then that I decided this is something I want to do. I soon got my chance in 1976. The Air Force started admitting a small number of women into active duty pilot training. 2 years later, during my last year at Syracuse University, I applied for Air Force pilot training and was one of the few women lucky enough to be accepted. It had been more than 30 years since the WASP program ended. At last, women were flying military aircraft again. It helped to know about the wasps, to know that women had already done this, that it wasn't impossible. Their love of flying gave them the courage to try something society didn't really expect women to do. Take to the skies. Their courage inspired me to follow my dreams too. In 1990, I was selected by NASA to become an astronaut. I remembered the wasps and felt a great responsibility to do a good job so there would be more opportunities for women in the future. In 1995, on my first flight as pilot of the space shuttle, I thought I had better not make a mistake because I wanted to set a good precedent for other women, just as the WASP had done. Although the WASP program was short-lived, the outstanding performance of these pilots helped open up opportunities for women in my generation and the generation to come. WASPs trained hard, took risks, did a great job, and served their country. They also got to do something they love to do, fly. The change of a lifetime. A small but battered plane zoomed over the sizzling California desert. Bullets whizzed by the cockpit as soldiers down on the sand shot off round after round of gunfire. Luckily, no bullets hit that little plane. The gutsy young woman in the pilot's seat made another safe landing. She was also helping to make history. It was early 1944 during World War II. The pilot, Noni Horton Anderson, belonged to a special group of women pilots, the WASPs, Women Air Force Service Pilots. They made history by being the first woman trained to fly military planes on a whole range of missions for the U.S. Armed Forces. Eager to help. That was the most fun I had in my life. Remembers Nani, a nickname for Leonora. It was beautiful flying back and forth over the desert. The troops doing the shooting weren't the enemy. They were young American soldiers. Wasps gave these young men practice aiming at moving targets in the sky so the soldiers would be ready to fight real battles overseas. The soldiers didn't actually shoot at a wasp plane. They aimed at a long piece of cloth that trailed along behind the plane, attached by a strong cable. Sometimes inexperienced soldiers shot a wasp's plane by mistake. They never hit Nani's plane, but she says a classmate's plane was hit. The gunners used a real ammunition. Was it dangerous? You don't think of those things. Was it dangerous? You don't think of those things, says Nani. She had a job to do, and she did it. Nani felt lucky to be flying at all. Before World War II, the U.S. military wouldn't use women as pilots. Neither would the airlines. Most people still thought flying was a man's job. It was hard for a woman pilot to find a flying job. Airplanes had been around for only a few dozen years. Most Americans had never been in a plane. Not many before had learned to be pilots, especially not many women. But nearly 3,000 American women had managed to learn to fly by the time the United States entered World War II at the end of 1941. They wanted to use their flying skills to help their country. They had a tough time persuading the Army to give them a chance. The Army handled most military flying back then. The U.S. Air Force, as a separate branch of the military, wasn't created until after the war. Finally, in late 1942, the Army created two new groups just for women pilots, groups that a year later combined to become the WASPs. The 1,102 women who served in these new units weren't allowed to fly overseas, where all World War II battles took place. They flew mainly in the United States, doing military flying that didn't involve combat. Men who would otherwise do those jobs could then go overseas to the battlefronts. Fly girls. At first, Army officials worried about the skills of these fly girls. As some people called them, male pilots were called fly boys. But WASPs proved that women could fly as well as men, and as safely too. Oh, it was the wrong way. And as safely too. Wasps flew every kind of plane the Army had. We were able to fly all these marvelous airplanes. This was probably the greatest experience in our lives for all of us, notes Barbara Erickson, London. Their expert flying skills earned them another nickname, Hot Pilot, slang for a super flyer. Some wasps jokingly call themselves Miss HP. However, many missions were risky, even for tough HP. 38 of these women pilots died flying for their country. Our country was in danger then. There was great pride in doing your part, says Florine Miller Watson. The United States entered the war after Japanese airplanes bombed American airfields and ships at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in December 1941. Both Japan and its ally Nazi Germany were launching attacks on many countries. The United States believed it had to try to put a stop to that. Wasp McGee G notes, I felt I had an obligation to do something to help. BJ Williams, short for Betty Jane Williams, adds, when you can do your part and do something you love, it's terrific. However, the Wasp's final challenge was the toughest of all. As the war started going better for the United States, the armed forces didn't need so many pilots. The Army decided to end the WASP program in December 1944, several months before the war was over. It would be about 30 years before American women had a chance to fly for the military again. It would be about 30 years after American women had a chance to fly for the military again. This book tells the story of Nani, Florence, BJ, Barbara, McGee, and the more than 1,000 other young women who served in the WASPs. Some had just finished high school or were in college when they joined. Others were teachers, nurses, models, writers, engineers, librarians, flight instructors, or office workers. They gladly stopped what they had been doing for the chance of a lifetime, the chance to fly fantastic planes for their country. Although their mission was cut short, they helped open the skies for women, proving that a woman's place can very well be inside a cockpit. FI, the WASP mascot. Close up. Or Fifi. Wasps had a cartoon mascot named Fifi, a winged creature with goggles and leather boots designed by artists at Walt Disney Studios. Most U.S. military units in World War II had cartoon mascots, which decorated everything from jackets to bombers. Fifi came from The Gremlins, a children's book written in 1942 by Roald Dahl. At the time, he was a young British pilot. His book told of imaginary creatures that played tricks on pilots. He named male mischief makers gremlins. A female one was a Fifinella or Fifi. Wasps felt Fifi was as naughty as a male gremlin. She kept the sand out of your gas tank and kept the engine running, Nani Horton Anderson explains. B.J. Williams adds, Fifi helped U.S. come home safely. Helped us come home safely. That's all I'm going to do for right now. Bye, guys.